Today, we ask the question, is Skyrim for the Nintendo Switch worth buying? Now, while having this discussion, we're going to look at 4 different criteria. 1 is going to be how it plays, both docked and in portable mode. 2, we're going to look at whether or not it is fun. 3, we're going to look at whether or not it is beatable by yourself, self-beatable. And the 4th thing we're going to look at is whether or not it makes a good Switch game, which I'll explain later on. So let's go ahead and hop into the first one, how it plays. Now, if I'm being honest with you, I have had no complaints with this game and its playthrough at all. There have only been about 3 instances where the frame rate has dropped to a point where I've not been satisfied. The first one, I was fighting a huge dragon. I had an aura around me. I was using a weapon that gave fire damage as well as healing myself, which has its own particle effect, and then I was doing a shout. And at that point, it overloaded the server, I think, to drop it to about, I'm going to estimate between 5 and 10 frames per second for about 15 seconds. I mean, when someone says the game is literally unplayable, that game at that point was literally unplayable. However, I pressed the pause button, it stopped everything that was happening, and I was able to recollect, and I actually didn't die because of it. So, while that happened, there have only been 2 other instances that I know of frame rate drops, and it's been for about 5 seconds. I've been doing about 20 frames a second, missing out a little bit, but it's kind of like light lag online. It's not anything too crazy, anything I can complain about, nothing like that. The one thing I will say is that in tablet mode, it does play just a little bit slower. Now, I'm not the kind of guy that needs a busty frame rate. I don't need the Xbox One X level of processing speed, but even I noticed that on the tablet, it does play just a little awkward. And another thing I will talk about later, but also mention now, is that on the tablet, it's definitely not optimized for first person. The way the Joy-Con controllers move, their joysticks don't have a tight range, meaning they're very loose to the fingers, meaning when you turn around, a lot of times it's accelerated until you get where you want to go. So it does not help the game overall when you're playing in tablet mode. Now, in third person on tablet, it actually runs very well. It's very similar to a tighter shot version of Breath of the Wild because it is this one sprawling RPG where you have equipable weapons, all that kind of stuff. So what I recommend when you're playing is to switch to third person while in tablet mode and keep it in first person while on the TV for the Skyrim experience. The next thing we're going to look at is whether or not it is fun. And this one I will argue to the death, because I will say, after putting I think 30-something hours into this game so far, that fun is not a word I would use to describe it. I think engaging, I think intriguing, I think depth are all adjectives you could use to describe Skyrim, but I don't think fun is one I would quite use to qualify it. Not because it's not a good game. It is one of the best games I think that has been made. It's just expansive, there's tons of stuff to do, the combat is interesting, it's not quite as fluid and optimal as I think it could be, but this is also a very old game, and you're dealing with a first-person combat scenario. So, while I do enjoy the idea of playing an RPG in first person, I will say that in combat it's just not quite perfect. But the question really is it fun? And I think that one is somewhat subjective, and I'll admit, this has not been my favorite game I've played. I've put a lot of hours because I do enjoy playing it, but at no point in time have I ever stopped and said, man, I'm having a lot of fun. Man, I'm having a lot of fun right now. Instead, what I've said is, what... Oh, come on, how long is this gonna take? Instead, what I have said is that, man, this feels a lot like a chore, because there's so much to explore, and that's usually not a problem. In fact, in Breath of the Wild, I think that was one of the most fun things you could do, because there was not a hefty story attached with each side quest. In fact, one of the things I think worked with Breath of the Wild was that these expansive missions, these side quests, these dungeons, these shrines, everything felt really vivid, and you could explore everything on your own time. With Skyrim, there are 4 different storylines going on, each with varying quests, and you'll run into more quests as it goes, and it gets a little bit taxing after a while. There's also a problem of a steep difficulty curve between areas, and a lot of times the game actually encourages you to fast travel, which I think is a problem. I think fast travel is great if you are playing the game and you want to get somewhere quick. In fact, they use it quite a bit. But Skyrim does this thing where fast travel is actually your best way to get around, because odds are when you're going from one area to another, you're going to encounter an enemy that's too high level for you. And leveling in this game is actually pretty interesting. While it does boost your stats as you level up, you get a skill tree which you get to unlock attributes for. Now you also get points toward each attribute as you level up, as you use the items, so it encourages you to play the game because you do get better. Your character does grow, but a lot of that growth is determined by what weapons and armor you have. So if you run into an enemy with better weapons and armor at a very low level that is on the path to the next place you're supposed to go, a lot of times you will fail. And it's not really anything against you as a player, it's more of the game design. So when I'm playing this game, and I think the Switch is one of the most fun consoles out there, I don't feel like I'm having a great deal of fun. And I think that is something that, one, is subjective, but two, it's somewhat quantifiable. I think a game like Super Mario Odyssey, like Breath of the Wild, like ARMS, like Splatoon, even something like Fractured But Whole, those games are all fun. They're enjoyable. You're laughing, you're smiling while you're playing them. This one you don't get that euphoric rush. You get more of a relief when you've finally beaten something. I think that's something worth noting. Now the next thing I want to talk about is whether or not the game is self-beatable. And I think this is a fair criticism that people don't say a lot. I feel like it's something we need to touch on, because games, in my opinion, should be able to be beaten by yourself. And that's one of the metrics I use when evaluating games. If you don't think this applies, that's fine, you can skip ahead. But if it's something that interests you, I think it's something worth noting. Now, Skyrim puts you in first person. That's a default setting, that's what it sets you to, that's how you're supposed to play the game. And while that takes several hours of getting used to, once you do, it just feels right. Like, that is the optimal Skyrim experience. It does this so that you have a chance to play it, to enjoy it, to love what you're doing, put yourself in the story. So I think that also necessitates a version of the story which is beatable by yourself. And I can honestly say this is not beatable just by playing the game. Technically you can find everything, but the odds are you will not. You'll get distracted by something else, you'll not be able to access the hidden rooms, and while there is a mini-map or compass thing that shows you where you're supposed to go, a lot of times it's not enough. It doesn't suffice for showing a lot of dungeons. When I was doing the College of Winterhelm quest story, I couldn't find the under the college area because I kept going to the base of the college and looking around, and you can't access it there. You can only access it in a very out of place hidden door that does not really work. There are areas where I believe a hidden door would work to be, but this specific one was not in one of those areas. It was a very just strange, seemingly random location. So I had to look that up, and there have been multiple times while playing. One thing, I went to an area that the game actually encouraged me to go to, and I was so under-leveled and unprepared for that area that I had to leave, and I wouldn't have known that if I had looked it up. So I think there are definite design problems when playing, and I don't think this game is self-beatable. You will have to look things up to beat this game. Now, the last criteria I've established is whether or not it is a good Switch game. And I feel like this one is something specific to the Switch that we need to address for all games moving forward. A good Switch game is able to move seamlessly from docked to tablet form, and it is a fun, engaging experience either way. Now, regardless of what we said about fun already, we're going to deal with this one. And I feel like this is where nostalgia meets new gamers. Because nostalgic gamers love this game. They want to go back into it. They have a Switch. They want to pick up Skyrim for the Switch and play it like that. New gamers, people with a Switch, have heard people talk about Skyrim and might not be familiar with the game design, with the gameplay. So if you go into it expecting a game that's perfect for the Switch, you're not going to find it. This is definitely a docked game. In fact, getting a Pro Controller for Christmas actually was the best thing for this game because it finally makes it what I would consider playable. If it's in handheld mode, it just does not run correctly. One of the big criticisms I have is lockpicking. I really enjoy the lockpicking feature of this game. I really have a lot of fun with it. The problem is, when you play it in handheld mode, you cannot lockpick to save your life. The vibrations don't feel right. It's very strange having your hands so far apart. You're not getting that vibration when you're getting it the right angle. It just doesn't work. And like we talked about before, the Joy-Cons aren't great at that kind of micro movement with your joystick. Another big problem you see is the controls in first person. Because of how quick it is to turn using the Joy-Cons and the big handheld mode where your hands are probably that far apart, it's very difficult to get a good aim when you're in first person, especially when an RPG, when your length is determined by the length of your blade. In first person shooters, this can somewhat be overcome because of how limitless your range is. You're not limited to a 2-foot radius, you've got a good bit. And as someone that likes to use two-handed weapons in the game, it's very difficult to do this because of how long your swing takes and how it already puts you off balance. And there are some things you can do to tune in your aim between a weapon, such as turning the controls, but a lot of times it goes above and beyond what you're trying to do, so it actually plays against you. And that's why I recommend playing in third person if you're going to do it in handheld. But that limits some of the things you can do, because eventually, like I said, you will have to go back into first person for things like lock picking. So I would not recommend playing it in handheld mode at all. I would say keep it docked. This is a console game. It is meant to be played as a console, and the Switch really isn't a traditional console, it's a hybrid. And I feel like that's something that needs to be stated, is that if you're going for a Switch experience, this is your first time playing a game like Skyrim or something else, this is not a good Switch first experience to have. Playing it in a handheld is a detriment to the game rather than something that enhances the console. And I think that's something worth noting looking back. So, let's go ahead and wrap up. Now, does it play well? Yes. Is it fun? That's a debatable question, but I would argue that no. It is not a traditionally fun, but it is engaging, so I think it is worth playing. Next, is it self-beatable? No, I don't think it's a self-beatable game at all. I think you do need to look up online. I think you need guides, maybe friends to talk you through this, which I don't mind talking to friends, but having to look up online takes me out of the game, which is a first-person game, so it really shouldn't. And the last thing is it a good Switch game? And that I will say emphatically no. It is not a good Switch game. It is a good game. If you want to play it, get it. It is a good game, worth playing. I highly recommend it, but it is not a good Switch game. So I would recommend getting it for your PS4 or Xbox One. Get the remastered version. You're going to have a much better experience, I think, playing it. Now, with that all said, obviously all of this is my own opinion. I would love to hear yours. So please, if you don't mind, leave your opinions in the comments below. I'll be sure to read all of them, and I really want to hear back from you. But if you've made it this far, guys, thank you so much for watching. Please consider hitting that like button and subscribing if you're new. But like we always say here, guys, we hope to see you around sometime.